Luis Benveniste, who is the Global Director for Education and Skills at the World Bank. And I'm now also allowed to say that he is changing the job to be Director of Human Development for East Asia Pacific and moving to Singapore very soon. So he'll actually tell you, we asked him to start with a little bit about how the World Bank works and sort of his career trajectory a little bit, so you can understand how these things fit in. But he's pretty high up there, basically. And Alan Ruby is here, who now has Alan's old job. And I think Alan hired Luis Benveniste for his first job at the World Bank, so all the world is a circle. Anyway, basically he leads the education's global education strategy and portfolio, which means he oversees programs that support education systems worldwide. That's from early childhood to tertiary. And all, as we'll talk about today, with a focus on improving learning outcomes and skills. Previously, he did the Human Development Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean, co-author of the 2012 Gender Equality and Development. I did not know that until I read this, with now in the Philippines. Went to Manny Jimenez. Yeah, with Manny. I did not, and he's done work on education finance and gender, student assessment. His doctoral dissertation was on student assessment and high-stakes testing in Latin America. He wrote a book in Dr. Dan Wagner's, wrote a chapter in Dr. Dan Wagner's book called Financing Education at the Bottom of the Pyramid. And also has wrote a book, a very interesting book with Jeffrey Marshall on teaching in Cambodia. Did a lot of interesting work that I remember on Escuela Nueva with Patrick McEwen, and also wrote a book that got a lot of really good and interesting press called All Else Equal with Martin Carnoy and Richard Rothstein, which was about accountability and the organization of public and private schools in the U.S. Basically worked all over. Has a BA in psychology from Harvard and a PhD in international and comparative education from Stanford. I've asked him to start by talking a little bit about the bank and himself, and hopefully it'll take long enough that by the time he's done with that, he'll have his presentation up and running. So without further ado, he's also, and this is actually somewhat rare for this position, a super nice guy. He's like really a nice guy. Everybody likes him. I'm not quite sure how that works. All right. He's going to start. We can just work behind the scenes.
I'll sit here in the middle. Thank you, Alex. Thank you for the great introduction. It's great to be here. It's great to be surrounded by the next generation of education and professionals, education. Thank you. Can you hear me? So thank you for inviting me to your class today. So let me start just to talk a little bit about myself. When I started out, I did, as Alex mentioned, my BA in cognitive psychology. I thought that my dream job was to get work in a research lab and to do sort of research on how kids sort of learn how to acquire sort of basic language functioning. I searched for a job, I couldn't find anything that nobody would take me. And so as it happened, I started working at a place called Education Development Center as a research analyst there, working on a project that sort of did short-term technical training programs for Costa Rican sort of entrepreneurs to learn some basic technical skills. It was a USAID funded project, and much to my surprise, I just took that job because I was the only thing that I could find. Much of I really enjoyed it. It was a great experience. I got to know great people. I got introduced to the USAID ecosystem and how that was like. And at one point, I said, look, I want to try something new. And so I got a job working on another USAID funded project, which was they were supporting the first school census in Jamaica. I was about 25 years old then, and it was a job of a lifetime in terms of I was in Jamaica, traveling all around, so getting paid just to visit all of these parts of the island and visiting all of the schools and just checking whether how many teachers are where, how many toilets were functioning, and so on and so forth. And at that point, the chief of party of our project said to me, look, if you really love this kind of work, maybe you can get more skills and you can do a lot more. You can have a much more impactful role. And so that's how I went back to university, got my PhD in international comparative ed. And again, there, as I was doing my training, I got lucky in that I really I got involved in education from a wide variety of perspectives. My advisor was Martin Carnoy, who was an education economist, but at the same time he's very interested in political sociology. I did my dissertation on British political sociology of assessment systems, supported by people like Karen Mundy or John Mayer. And then I also got some training from George Stendler, who was an educational anthropologist. He's the father of educational anthropology in the U.S., who really taught me how to walk into a classroom and learn how to watch and then learn from what people are doing, people are saying, people are experiencing. It gave me a super valuable insight as to how education systems are essentially communities that have their own culture, their own logic, their own way of being, and then that has huge impacts on how kids ultimately learn. And then from there, I came to the World Bank as the Young Professionals Program. I think many of you probably are familiar. This is an entry level type of program at the World Bank for a professional career. And as I was graduating from the YP program, I had the really good fortune of working in Alan's team at the time, and he gave me my first permanent job at the bank, and from there I worked all across East Asia, Latin America, Africa, and then parachuting as a global director. I get to parachute in and out of a wide variety of other places. It has been the privilege of a lifetime to get a first row seat as to how policymakers are thinking about educational change, how to really tackle some of the big questions of our time, the issues of how to prepare truly the next generation for a very rapidly changing world, which gives me to a segue as to talk about the World Bank and the work that we do. So in terms of where we're at, I won't go through all of the slides very carefully. Just give you a very quick feel for the main messages. But we see huge challenges on education today, and I think that they are increasingly pressing. First, only about 40% of kids between 3 and 6 in the developing world have access to early childhood education. And we know that early childhood education is really sets the foundations right, and oftentimes it's a big opportunity for level up. So a lot of the inequalities that the children are born with. About 7 out of 10 kids in the developing world cannot read a paragraph with comprehension that is age appropriate by the age of 10. And if we look at sub-Saharan Africa, that's about 9 kids out of 10. And so again, that shows us how in many parts of the world, even though kids are going to school, they are still not getting those really critical foundational skills, basic numeracy, basic literacy, the social emotional support, that are really so fundamental, because these are the skills that beget all of the other future skills. But at the same time, when we look sort of at the world of work and what we're preparing the next generation for, we know that about, again, more than half of people today, so the types of skills that they will need for the types of jobs that will be out there will be different from what they are today, and they'll need to be upskilled or reskilled. And then sort of, the world of education is not particularly well connected to the world of work. So that school to work transition, how to ensure that sort of, that there is there are bridges that easily sort of, support university graduates or TVET graduates into sort of the types of jobs where they're needed, are falling short. So about 85 million jobs oftentimes are left unfilled, either because schools are not preparing kids with the right types of capacities that they need, or because, again, so there is a break in that in between these two worlds. Now, again, I don't think I need to convince you about the big impact that education has on people's lives. 8 out of 10 so graduates from higher education, so 8 in 10 youth with post-secondary education are in good jobs. So in that sense, education is a passport to a good job. Having for every year of education, a person sort of is expected to earn about 10% better wages, and about, again, so 50% of economic growth is directly linked to human capital. So that in that sense, investments in education are really sort of a critical pathway for countries to grow. Now, we live in a changing world, and just to put a few things out there, as you can see, some of the demographic trends in the top left-hand corner around the world. For most of the world, populations are going down. So the fertility rates are low. So that means that sort of, education systems are preparing fewer and fewer students, except for sub-Saharan Africa, where the demographic change is just astounding. There hasn't been a demographic shift as dramatic as this in our history. And so by 2050, about 3/4 of the world's youth will have been born in Africa. And with that, so again, we saw big changes in our geopolitics. There are about 500 million kids who are growing up in conflict-affected countries. And the world of work is being dramatically transformed by the digital transformation, by automation, by AI. And so we expect about 40% of workers' core skills will be changing by 2030. If we layer on top of that the fact that in low-income countries, on average, they're spending $55 per kid per year, as opposed to about $8,500 in a high-income country. So $50 per kid is not remotely adequate to provide a basic quality education. And so we see, again, a huge imbalance there. So, in terms of the World Bank's program portfolio, what we're trying to focus on, again, this is not going to surprise you, it's not going to say particularly anything new, it's just making sure that we are investing in the early years so that every child has the opportunity to have a sound, strong early nutrition, early stimulation, so we start as best as possible in their educational trajectory. That's sort of investing in the foundational learning, basically how to support teachers to show up in the classroom prepared for supporting kids, as well as how to leverage technology in a way that supports the pedagogical purposes, and ultimately how to mobilize the necessary resources to begin being able to make up for that difference. And then so as students go into the later years, how to get them ready to for the world of work, how to really bring those two worlds better together by having greater industry linkages, being able to crowd in resources from the private sector, and then ultimately you can support that school to work transition. In terms of the World Bank's work program, we have a fairly large footprint. We are the largest external financier of education out there. The largest financiers, obviously, domestic research organizations from countries. We have about a $25 billion portfolio that's standing today on education in about 90 countries and territories that are supporting about 325 million children across the world. Since 2000, the bank probably invested about $65 billion on education projects. And so that speaks to a wide diversity of programs all the way from early childhood to higher education and beyond. Okay, I'll pause there just for good. I don't know if there are any comments on or questions about the World Bank and World Bank's education program before then I go into a little bit about what we're doing on teacher education. Is there any pressing? No question is bad. So this is a chance. Anything you ever wanted to know about the World Bank, this is a chance. There's about 225 to 150 people working on education at the World Bank today. A fairly large concentration is in Washington, D.C., but most of the education staff are placed in country offices around the world. We have offices in more than 90 countries. Working very closely with ministers and ministries of education, as well as a wide variety of international partners. Okay, let me talk a little bit about teacher education and why. So this is sort of the summary of a report that we're just about to launch, and it really focuses on teacher education, but it's important first to just put it into context, in the sense that we are aware that pre-service training, initial teacher education, is just the beginning, and it's part of a much broader teacher trajectory and support network, and ultimately we're really thinking about how do we first attract teacher students into the pre-service training, and then how to think about the hiring and deployment of teachers, as well as the support that they require over their lifetime, so that they're continuously developing professionally. And then it's just not only about the training that needs to take place, but also the ecosystem around them in terms of quality assurance, in terms of accountability, in terms of management. Again, it's also critical in order for them to be at their best at work. Now, we think of teacher education as having three critical pillars around the core knowledge and skills that are required for teaching, as well as the importance of having a strong professional identity, so that the teaching profession is adequately recognized and compensated in a way that makes it an attractive profession. And ultimately, we really need to think about what are the qualities that enhance the effectiveness of overall educational investments that lead to improved foundational learning outcomes through teachers. Now, the broad dimensions of a credible teacher education program revolve around your subject matter knowledge, whether it's language or math. Then having those pedagogical skills that are again critical to be able to convey that subject knowledge effectively, and that includes understanding of child learning and child development, as well as how to do classroom management and how to do lesson planning, and then ultimately how to really instill a strong professional identity of teachers, and all of the ethical considerations and responsibilities that relate to working with some vulnerable populations. Now, again, so part of the reason why we embarked on this study was because there was a recognition that if you look at the World Bank portfolio, all of those $25 billion that were invested in education, the share that we were doing on initial teacher education was tiny. And most of the effort went around continuous professional development. So how to deal with the shortfalls of the current cadre of teachers that are in the classroom today. And so we came to realize that, okay, that if you want a long-term solution, really you need to sort of, start earlier. And so again, so we've embarked on this effort to really sort of trying to unpack, okay, so how different countries think about initial teacher education and what can be done about it. Also, again, I think that shockingly, we realize that what countries invest on initial teacher education oftentimes is much greater than the development budget that ministries have. So again, this is a very substantial share of education budgets that is therefore largely under-leveraged for the impact that it could have. And so in that sense, again, so again, if we want long-term solutions, continuous professional development is just a remedial effort. We really sort of need to go back to the basics to find ways in which, for sustainable change. Now, if you look at sort of the types of requirements that countries have for teacher education, we see that about half of the countries, a bachelor's degree or higher is necessary to be able to teach at the primary school. For more than half of low-income countries, teachers are prepared at a secondary level education. Yes, so it's only sort of a high school degree that is necessary. And outside sub-Saharan Africa, no country accepts lower secondary education as a qualifying minimum. But we still see large patches of Africa where a lower secondary education is enough to get you to be a teacher. Now, increasing qualification levels alone may not be necessary to improve learning outcomes. There's a vast body of work that sort of points to the fact that teacher qualifications are not correlated with student learning. And so that's an important reminder that just attending an initial teacher education program is not sufficient for being able to be an effective teacher that gets kids to learn. We also see a wide variety of approaches to initial teacher education. So again, so we think of initial teacher education as the sort of the core foundation where the basic capacities and capabilities of future teachers are being learned. So there is a wide variety of approaches that countries take in order to be able to support that process. Oftentimes it's through institutionally based programs in universities or in colleges, and that's the most common approach. But then there are also a series of complementary strategies in places where, for a wide variety of reasons, that's not possible. That includes, school-based residency programs where just teachers are placed and then they learn on the job, or mechanisms to provide fast track or emergency programs, short-term, short-cycle programs, programs that are put together into modules over the course of 4 or 5 years. There are all ways in which again, to try to satisfy country needs to get more teachers in front of classrooms. Now, there are 5 key principles that we deem critical for effective teacher education systems. And to begin with, starts with how to make IT programs attractive and selective, so they're targeting high potential candidates. If we look at the distribution of capacities that, in a population, and so the share that those go into teaching, so the share of high-performing, high-potential people that go into teaching is decreasing significantly year on year across the world. And so really, so how to really rethink so the teacher profession to make it more attractive. So it is a core challenge that is being faced across the developing world. And so therefore, sort of how to assess and monitor teacher workforce needs, how to attract strong candidates, and how to implement rigorous entry requirements is a first step to try to sort of reshape the teacher professional profile. Secondly, how to provide relevant and impactful IT program content by skilled teacher educators. So how to essentially level up the quality of initial teacher education, and how to ensure that sort of the programs have adequate subject matter knowledge, how to really sort of build on such a specific and general pedagogical knowledge, and ultimately sort of how to use program teaching methods that connect theory to practice. For the most part, initial teacher education is highly theoretical in its ethos, and really sort of how to really sort of graduates find it really hard to translate what they learn in the classroom into sort of what the actual classroom needs. And then sort of how to really sort of think about field how to incorporate quality field placements. So really sort of again, graduates really sort of have that know-how of how to manage a group of children, and how to really sort of being able to most impactful in how to being able to facilitate that teaching and learning process. Again, so a wide variety of countries are sort of using field placements as acknowledge the importance of field placements. But again, so on the whole, these tend to be really low quality. It's very poorly designed in sort of the types of schools and classrooms where student teachers are being placed. The type of support that they get during these practicums is of low quality. And then ultimately, sort of, we often modeling behavior is really critical for acquiring skills, and so students are not necessarily being matched with high-performing teachers, so that they get good models early on in their careers. And then sort of, oftentimes, how to ensure that there's a strong alignment between initial teacher education institutions and education systems it's been quite difficult, and I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to skip this now for now because I'm going to talk about it in the next slide, but again that's a critical element of how these programs are really structured, and then finally sort of, how to ensure that there are quality assurance processes to maintain high quality standards, either through assessing and validating sort of these institutions, so making sure that they're accountable for certain accepted priorities and objectives that the ministries of education can set, and then ultimately sort of how these are accredited over their lifetime, so that their quality is being upheld over time. Now, in terms of alignment, oftentimes ministries of education have a certain set of goals and priorities are laid out in education programs. And so how to ensure that initial teacher educations are well aware of those priorities, of those curricular designs, but ultimately are connected both to what the policy principles are, as well as to sort of what the schools in reality, the ranges that they face. Yeah, oftentimes schools face a particular set of needs or realities in terms of their location, in terms of their student populations, in terms of their availability of resources. That sort of theory and practice are not well connected. So in that way, initial teacher educations need to be well attuned to both the policy principles as well as the realities on the ground. and then ultimately sort of, be well anchored around research and sort of good practices, as well as to sort of, being able to respond and being attuned to teachers and the teacher profession and their sets of demands as voiced, for example, by teacher unions. And so, the attunement to the sort of the reality of the ground is really critical for initial teacher education programs to be sort of, well prepared to respond to those priorities, whether it's because the country faces teacher shortages, and therefore you need to expand the teacher supply. And so again, much becomes on how to attract more students into programs and how to sort of being able to put together fast track programs to sort of get more well-prepared people in front of classrooms, or how to sort of really sort of look at remediation of academic content as needed to be able to respond to those critical shortages. And then sort of the opposite problem, which is the oversupply of teachers in many countries, again, because they're decreasing demographics. So it's an opportunity for initial education to rethink their intake, to really be able to think about sort of having more rigorous criteria for entry, to really sort of rethinking of sort of the type of curriculum that can be delivered because there's an oversupply of teachers. And so again, these are all ways of attuning teacher education to the realities on the ground. And then just, as a coda, so, part of this research we did sort of a series of 11 teacher education case studies from around the world, from a wide variety of countries, looking through a wide variety of case studies, whether it's programs that had a long-standing transformation over the course of decades, like Vietnam, to sort of doing deep dives on the transformation of a initial education institution like in Bahrain, and how so they reinvented themselves, as well as sort of looking at sort of how initial education programs responded to a particular policy initiative of a government to improve the quality of education, such as in Morocco. So again, this sets of case studies that if you use that QR code, will get you to them. Will give you a sense of a wide variety of approaches that different countries took to again truly reshape initial teacher education. And I'm going to speak very briefly of three. One about being Vietnam. And basically, I have to say this is a longitudinal case study of how in the early 80s, Vietnam really had a vastly underqualified teacher cadre. There was a big policy initiative to try to lift up the quality of initial teacher education, but also with a very strong focus on remote areas and rural populations, and how to really get better teachers into those locations. That involves first of all ensuring that every province in Vietnam had a teacher education college, upscaled those institutions into doing bachelor degrees or equivalent, and then setting up a series of teacher standards and a set of expectations of how teachers ought to perform, with tools that help teachers self-evaluate and being monitored in their performance, and then fed into the types of support programs to really upskill and upgrade teacher performance through directly linked observable behaviors, and then ultimately help progressively improve the qualifications from primary teachers to secondary teachers, and then again it continuously raise the qualification expectations of entry-level teachers from secondary graduates to college graduates. In Ghana, again, this is a case where it's a response to a policy initiative from the government. Again, this is much more recent, and it's really looking at the ways in which teacher education was largely fragmented, it was largely sort of being conducted by individual institutions across the country. Mostly of it was incoherent in its totality because each institution did whatever they thought it was best. And so then government put into place a national teacher standard framework and a national teacher education curriculum framework that sort of helped create coherence, set expectations of what this program should look like, developed a new four-year bachelor's degree, and then so progressively now is working towards upscaling the quality of these institutions so they meet these minimum standards, including a practical requirement to ensure that, again, every graduate has hands-on experience of teaching. And then finally, so let me talk a little bit about Chile, where again, so here, again, sort of a fairly more recent reform that sort of responds to like a long-standing teacher professional upgrade effort of the Chilean government that looks at sort of, really sort of how to better regulate and better provide quality assurance to teacher training institutions. In the Chilean case, this was mostly done by private institutions that were unregulated, and again, so brought an accountability framework to ensure that, so again, there was a compulsory accreditation of these programs, and then a variety of diagnostic tests that were used to help programs identify their strengths and areas of improvement to ensure that they're all moving towards a basic minimum standard of quality. And with that, I think I spoke more than you bargained for. I'd love to chew one, and let me pause there and open it up for any questions or comments on anything that I